Can you just explain to me, to start off, just the impact on Australian businesses who were expecting more than half of the work from the submarine projects to be here in Australia, to be much of it in Adelaide?
Yeah, look, thanks very much for having me, Ross, and that's a great question. I mean, the reality here is that clearly the government has made a strategic decision, and we will always respect the government's right to do that. But you have got hundreds of Australian companies that have been systematically investing, upgrading, upskilling and spending money to get themselves ready to go into the supply chain for Naval Group. So yesterday's announcement by the Prime Minister, whilst applauded from a national security perspective, we need to ask the question, how are those companies going to be looked after?
Can I just ask one question? You were the chief executive at the Naval Group when this contract was being created with the Australian government. In your wildest dreams, could you have imagined at that time when you were doing that contract that it could have been broken for strategic reasons such as this?
Look, thanks, Ross. That's a really good question as well. Look, I think at the time, the strategic circumstances were what they were, and Australia didn't have the ability to access sensitive US and UK nuclear information. So Australia went down a path of looking for a conventional submarine. I don't think any of us would have thought that this could have happened, but none of us could have predicted the change in strategic circumstances. So I guess we've all learned something here.
Okay, so then another aspect of this, I noticed that the South Australian Defence Directory lists some 319 separate businesses that are defence contractors. So many of these businesses might already have committed money to this contract, in fact invested to be a part of this contract, not only now to have the rug pulled from under them. Where do they sit right now?
Well, Ross, I would imagine they're very nervous, and you're spot on. I mean, there are hundreds of companies. Obviously, you're referring directly to the South Australians. AVEN itself represents companies nationally. There are hundreds of companies around Australia that have been preparing themselves to get into the supply chain for this contract. They have been spending real money on doing this, and quite correctly. The Australian industry has answered the challenge from government to upskill and prepare itself to be part of the supply chain. They've done that. Now there's going to be a pause to this contract. We literally have no idea how we move forward for this, how these companies recoup their expenditure, their investment. Well, the bottom line is, hopefully, this expenditure and this investment will put them in good stead for future contracts. But the reality is, the Prime Minister has made the announcement that it will be at least 18 months whilst they do a review. One can assume logically that even if things work out perfectly and they get into some form of contract in 18 months, it will take at least another 6 to 12 months before contracts are let. So we are looking at a considerable period down the time. So we would be looking for government to make sure that they can look after these companies.
Well, that's pretty important because even the Prime Minister this week admitted that the government has already spent some $2.4 billion on the French submarine project. Now, that's obviously going to come back to some of those contractors, but there's other money that would be expected by those contractors over the next 18 months to 2 years. They've got a gap before potentially this American or UK project actually comes to formation in South Australia.
Oh, look, they do, Ross, and that is a reality. Now, governments are allowed to make strategic decisions based in the best interest of the country, and that's what we expect governments to do. Now, clearly they've done that. Clearly our strategic circumstances have warranted that, but the grim reality for some of these businesses is going to be they're not going to get work in that sector that they had planned for. Now, what we need to do is come up with an ability for these businesses to be supported or their services to be redirected into other defence programs to make sure that it's not a waste of money. We would really be seeking during this 18-month period for government to meaningfully engage with defence industry to make sure that Australian companies are designed into the process from the beginning. We want to create a sovereign industrial base, and the only way to do that is by planning now.
And are you fearful that some of the companies that might have been otherwise suppliers to the French project, because of this 2-year gap, may have financial difficulties being able to get themselves to the next contracts with either the US or the UK projects?
Oh, without doubt. Look, the vast majority of the membership of AIDEN are small to medium enterprises, micro companies from one person up to 300 people. They always are doing it tough. So it is quite possible, particularly with what's been happening with the COVID pandemic, that one or two of these businesses, or maybe several of these businesses, it may just be the end for them and they may just move on. They may have to shut down. We don't know the full implications. Clearly, as you could appreciate, if you've got a contract with Naval Group, you'd be fairly happy. You would have been looking at a 50-year program here, and you'd be secure in the fact that your business is able to operate. That's been removed. Now, again, AIDEN respects and understands that the government made a strategic decision. There is no issue at all with doing that. What we now need from the government is a plan to ensure that Australian businesses are looked after, and those businesses that are already involved and have spent money are looked after, and that Defence somehow can accommodate them so that they don't fold.
Brent Clark, Chief Executive of the Australian Industry and Defence Network. I appreciate your time here on the program today.